He was reaching for the salt when the boy stood up, eyes wild, hands shaking, and pressed a carving knife to his throat. Anna screamed. The fire cracked behind them, but no one moved. The boy's voice trembled. "He's gonna send us away, just like the last one." But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Thomas Whitaker had always lived alone in the house his father built with his bare hands, a quiet frame of pine and dust just past the edge of town, where the wind came slower and the years passed without raising their voice. He wasn't a man given to impulse or to company. Since the war took more than it gave back, he'd grown used to silence the way others grew used to breath. Natural, unthinking, necessary. So when the knock came that evening, soft but steady, it startled him not just for its sound, but for what followed when he opened the door. Anna Fletcher stood there like something out of the old scriptures, weathered, burdened, yet still upright. Her coat was too thin, her cheeks hollow. Snowmelt clung to her hem, and beside her, a boy stared up with hollow suspicion and knuckles white from clinging to his mother's skirt. She didn't beg, didn't cry, just looked him in the eyes and said, "We have nowhere else to go." Thomas hesitated only long enough to hear the wind breathe through the trees behind her. Then he stepped aside. The first thing she did after removing her boots was clean the stove. Not idly, not for gratitude's sake, but with a reverence that made Thomas feel like a guest in his own home. She moved carefully, as if the worn wood and blackened iron were holy, like she was restoring something forgotten. Her hands trembled from hunger, but didn't falter. Within an hour, the scent of apple and clove crept through the rooms. She had found an old jar of preserves in the root cellar, cut flour with cornmeal, and baked a bread that looked as humble as it did sacred. Thomas hadn't tasted sweetness in months, but he said nothing, only ate slowly and watched her. Jacob ate faster, eyes darting between every sound the house made. He flinched at the creak of the floorboard. When Thomas coughed, the boy's fingers gripped the edge of the table so tight his nails paled. But he didn't speak, not once. The next morning, Thomas folded his father's old blanket and left it draped over the chair where Anna had sat. No mention. That evening, he set a pot of milk on the stove just before bed. Again, no explanation. But the boy slept better that night. By the fourth day, the rhythm between them had begun to hum low and steady, like a forgotten hymn remembered not through lyrics, but through hands busy with small kindnesses. No one said the word family, but it hovered in the stillness, soft as the fading snow. The air in the kitchen thickened before anyone realized why. The stew had cooled in the bowls, untouched since Jacob had gone silent. The fire cracked lazily in the hearth, casting warm flickers on worn pine and cast-iron shadows. Outside, dusk had deepened into a blue so dark it pressed against the windows. But inside, time stopped the moment Jacob rose. He didn't speak, just moved, fast, smooth, like someone who'd rehearsed fear. The blade caught the lamplight first. Then the hush cracked open. Anna's gasp turned to a cry before her chair even hit the floor. Thomas didn't speak, didn't flinch, just stared down the glint of metal, no more than a few inches from the soft hollow of his neck. He didn't breathe, but not from fear, because something deeper, older, had gripped him. The look in that boy's eyes wasn't hatred. It was terror, dressed up as fury, a desperate scream wrapped in the only language he thought men listened to. "He's gonna send us away," Jacob choked, voice unraveling. "Just like the last one did. Just like they always do." Anna's hands found her son with the precision of instinct, yanking him back before the knife ever touched skin. It clattered across the floor with a dull, gut-heavy ring. The boy fell with it, knees buckling, palms hitting wood. His breath came in ragged pulls, like a storm trying to become a boy again. I thought he was looking at you like the others did. His words dissolved into gasps and apologies, but Anna was already on the floor with him, rocking gently, as if she could undo every scar carved into the lines of his fear. Thomas stood still. The room moved around him, but he remained unmoved, frozen not in body, but in history. Something about the boy's panic pulled old ghosts from his ribs. The war had taught him to read the eyes of men moments before they pulled triggers. And what he saw in Jacob wasn't violence. It was a child caught between memory and dread, swinging a knife not at a man, but at the shape of betrayal. Later, after the boy slept with his face buried in his mother's lap, Anna whispered everything. The man before, the bruises, the shame no one would name. The truth that in some towns, hospitality could rot into hunger. Thomas listened, then walked to the door, bolted it quietly, and sat back down. He didn't say a word, but he also didn't tell them to leave. The days stretched long and hushed like thread drawn taut before the first stitch. The house no longer felt like a refuge or a burden. It had become something else entirely, suspended between past pain and an unnamed possibility. Thomas moved through it with quiet hands, mending fence posts and oiling door hinges, not to make it perfect, but to make it livable. There was a difference. He understood that now. Anna kept mostly to the parlor and kitchen. Her movements were small, deliberate. She didn't hum when she worked, didn't chatter, but there was a softness in the way she folded towels, a gentleness in how she set each plate. Not like she was serving someone, but like she was restoring a forgotten rhythm. Curtains went up slowly, hand-stitched in the pale light that slanted through the west window. White cotton with little blue flowers, faint as a memory, but still there. Jacob lingered in the spaces between them. He didn't speak, not to Thomas, but he watched everything. The boy studied every motion of the adults like someone trying to learn a language he once knew and had forgotten out of fear. Then, one afternoon, Thomas returned from town with a parcel wrapped in faded linen. He set it down on the table without fanfare. Anna opened it slowly, hands pausing over the cloth like it might vanish. Inside, a hand-carved needle, smooth and pale, shaped from bone and polished with time. And beneath it, a folded swatch of an old quilt, patchwork faded by decades, threads frayed at the corners, but whole. A legacy in cotton and quiet devotion. "My mother," Thomas said. "She believed every stitch mends more than just cloth." That night, Anna sat by the fire, the needle dancing between her fingers. She didn't ask permission. She didn't explain. She simply began. Piece by piece, her own worn fabric joined with the quilt fragment from Thomas's past. Browns and creams, soft grays, muted violets. Nothing matched. Everything belonged. Each stitch a bridge, each pull of the thread a word unspoken. Jacob crept closer as the quilt grew. He didn't touch it, but he sat near, as if proximity alone might warm him. On the 7th evening, Thomas returned from the cold to find something waiting, a pie on the windowsill, apples and spice, the crust imperfect but golden, and Jacob, elbows on the table, turning pages of a book about horses, lips moving silently. Thomas said nothing. But in that moment, silence was no longer absence. It was a truce, a beginning. The morning sun filtered through the lace of the new curtains, laying soft patterns of light across the kitchen floor. The scent of cinnamon and wood smoke lingered in the air, not from any one thing, but from days upon days of living gently. It was Sunday. Quiet, unremarkable to most, but for Anna Fletcher, it marked something more than rest. It marked completion. She waited until the breakfast plates had been cleared and Thomas had returned from feeding the hens, his boots dusted with straw, his hands warm from the early labor. He was wiping them on a cloth when she spoke. "Would you come with me, please?" No embellishment, no preamble. But something in her tone slowed his steps. She led him to the parlor. The quilt lay draped across the rocking chair like a hymn sung in fabric. Nothing loud, but every note intentional. The colors weren't coordinated. They didn't need to be. Soft rose met tobacco brown, calico blues mingled with faint yellows. Every square bore the weight of memory. One had come from a dress Anna no longer wore, another from an apron that had seen too many winters, and others, from Thomas's mother's quilt, carried faded florals so delicate they looked like echoes. But at the center, stitched in thread so fine it looked like it had always been part of the fabric, were 3 names: Thomas, Anna, Jacob. The breath caught in his chest before he could find it again. Anna didn't speak. She stood with her hands folded, eyes lowered for a moment, then lifted, quiet, open, unflinching. There was no plea in them, no question, only the calm of someone who had finally laid down the weight of wondering whether she belonged. Footsteps sounded behind them. Jacob entered carrying a bundle of firewood too large for his frame, but held with care. He caught sight of the quilt, paused. His gaze lingered on the names, especially his own. He set the logs down gently, almost reverently, and straightened. He didn't look at the quilt again. He looked at Thomas. "Mr. Whitaker," the boy began, voice dry but steady. "You're not like the others." It wasn't a compliment. It was a verdict. Thomas stepped closer. Hands calloused and careful, he lifted the quilt from the chair and laid it across the boy's shoulders. The fabric settled around him like a shield, like a promise. "I never wanted a family," he said, barely louder than a breath. "But maybe I was waiting for this one." No one replied. They didn't need to. Outside, the last of the ice had melted, leaving the soil soft and dark beneath the trees. Buds trembled on every branch, not blooming yet, but close. So close.